This is our second video on looking at different types of test doubles in Java. If you haven't already watched the previous video on dummies and spies, I'll add a link here to the side of me where you can go and watch that before carrying on with this video. Hi, I'm Mark Bradley and welcome to Testing All the Things, a screencast in which we use live coding to demonstrate different types of testing tools and techniques. In this series of videos, we're looking at test doubles. These enable us to have control over our dependencies that go into our code under test. In this video, we're going to look at the next type of test double, which is a spy. Let's look at the code. In the previous video, we looked at stubs and dummies, and we started implementing the functionality of our driving license number generator. We used some stubs to replicate different types of applicant that could go into our driving license generate function. We had an applicant that was underage, that threw an exception because they couldn't apply for a license, and then we had an applicant who already held a license, and that threw another exception because you can't hold two driving licenses. In this video, we're going to look at spies. A spy test double implements the interface that we require and records any calls to the function, so we can interrogate what happened to our test double spy after our code under test has been run. A logger is a perfect use of a spy test double. We don't want to be specific about what is called or how before our code under test runs, but we do maybe want to interrogate what happened to our logger afterwards. So in this video, we are going to add the requirement to our license generate function that if an underage applicant or a duplicate applicant makes a request, we can log that as well as throwing the exception. So now we need to create a dummy, a spy of our logger interface. So let's first of all look at the logger interface. So our logger interface has one function called log, which takes a string info and returns nothing. So this is why there's no need really for a dummy in this case. We couldn't use a dummy because the logger doesn't return anything, so we don't need to dummy the function. But we would be interested in how many times our logger is called, and we would be interested in what information is passed to the log function. So let's create our spy logger. We'll create a new class, spy logger, and we'll pull it over to this side on the test side. And this needs to implement our logger. So our spy logger is now implements the interface. We could use this to start writing our test. So let's start that. Now, we've got two choices here. We could remove our logger dummy here and check for the logging in these tests, or we could create new tests. I think possibly the easiest way to go about this would be to just replace our logger with our spy logger here and add some additional testing to our, some additional assertions to our test. So we'll change dummy logger for spy logger in here. So we've got our spy logger, it's already being passed in, but we now need to make some assertions. What could we expect to happen to our spy logger when the code under test is run? Now we expect a log line to be added, so we could do assert equals we expect 1, and we could say something like logger dot spy logger now, logger dot count log calls. Okay, so we've got a function now that will return the count of log calls. If we generate that function on our spy logger, it returns an int. And the moment it returns 0, we need to make it do something. So let's do this. We'll do private int log call count, default to 0, and every time it gets called, we can say log call count increment, and we can return log call count. Okay, so that's now enabling us to start spying on our log function. The log function doesn't do anything for the code under test, it just implements the interface. But in our test class, we now have the ability to interrogate what happened to the logger as the code under test was executed. Let's run this test and see what happens. So that test has started to fail now. Okay, so we expected 1 for our call count, but we got 0 because we're not logging anything at this point. So let's do that. So this is the underage applicant. So just before we throw the underage applicant exception, we can say this dot logger dot log. Need to pass something. There we go. Okay, and we've now written enough code, hopefully, that this test will pass. Let's have a look. Yep, we have. That's great. So our spy has allowed us to, after the code is executed, look at what happened to it, and we know that it's called once, which is really helpful. But also, maybe we want to be a little bit more specific about how the function was called, or look at some of the information. So let's say we want to do something like assert. So for this, we can say something like assert true. We need to get the, so hang on, let's do this. So string log info equals logger dot get info for call, and we'll pass in 1. Okay, so for the first call, then we can do logger log info dot contains say too young. So we just want a little bit of information. We're not going to be specific about what's in the log, but we want to see the words too young in it. We need to implement this function. So on the spy logger. So we now need to start tracking information given to the log function. So we can call private array of strings equal, we'll call it log infos equals new, oh, wrong way around here, string array, new string array. Let's just default it to 10. That will probably work for these tests. I don't think we can go beyond that, so that makes it work. What we can do now is we can say something like log infos at log call count equals the info that's given, and then we can do return the log infos. So we didn't zero index it on there to make it a little bit easier because we wanted the first one, but we can just do the maths inside. So we can say I minus 1, like so. Okay. And hopefully that gives us something. So that looks pretty neat. In fact, if this returns a string, probably just cut that and put it straight there. Make our test a little bit smaller. We save that and run it. Okay. Our test is failing again. We expected true, but we got false because our return string does not contain too young. So let's make that pass. Applicant was too young to get a license, like so. So we run this, and our test passes. Okay. So it's not common to need to be kind of this specific about logging, but it was just that I used loggers because it was the kind of easiest type of interface that you could use a spy for. But any functionality you have where you have a dependency that takes something when it gets called but doesn't really return anything is an opportunity to use a spy type of test double. So we now have spied on the functionality for logger that should occur when a driving license is requested by an underage applicant. We'll use a spy a second time for a duplicate license request. So we will change our logger to be a spy logger. It needs to be a spy logger. Okay. It's the same assertions really, so we'll just copy these down. And we expect it to be 1, and we'll just expect the word duplicate. Duplicate. There we go. Okay, so we'll run our tests. So we expected 1, we got 0, so we're going to do just enough to make that test, that error go away. So we'll do this .logger .log. So we've called the function, okay? At the moment, that's all we understand because that's our failure. We expected it to be called once, but it was actually called 0 times. So that should get rid of this error. So we'll run the test. Okay. We've fixed that error, but we've now got another error. So we expected true, so we expected the info call number 1 to contain the duplicate in it, but it doesn't. So now we have the opportunity to write a message that contains that word. We can say applicant requested duplicate license. Okay. And we'll run that test and see what happens. So both our tests are now passing again, and we've added a spy test double to our set of test doubles available for these tests. So if we go back and look at our spy before we finish, we can see that a spy test double doesn't need to return any information. It's more of a function that just takes information, and it logs what happens to it whilst the code under test is run, enabling us to interrogate what happened during the execution of the code under test afterwards in our test code. This allows us to call functions without having to kind of fully set things up, have strict requirements on how the function's called and what it should return. I hope you found this video on Spies useful. In the next video, we're going to move on to a different type of test tuple, which will be a mock. I'll see you again soon. Thank you for watching this episode of Testing All the Things. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please rate and review the video and subscribe to the channel. If you did not and you have any feedback, please leave a comment in the comment section of the video or contact me on Twitter @Bradle.